Indian External Affairs Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar is in the US. He's held a number of meetings on the margins of the UN General Assembly in New York City. Former Indian Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya joins me from New Delhi to put those meetings in their proper context for you, the viewer. Ambassador Bhattacharya, welcome to DD India News Hour. Now, Minister Jaishankar has held a flurry of meetings on the margins of the UN General Assembly in New York City. Among the ministers he met was the Foreign Minister of Armenia. Now, what can you tell us about India-Armenia relations? How is it similar or different from India's ties with Azerbaijan? And what has been India's position on the Nagorno-Karabakh issue, over which Armenia and Azerbaijan have already fought 2 wars?
Well, as you know, India and Armenia have a very old historical relationship. And we've had old Armenian communities that are based in India, as well as Indians of a long vintage who've lived in that region as well. So the relationship is actually very old. India was one of the earliest to extend the recognition and establish relations with Armenia. What we also saw is that that particular relationship developed very quickly, and we have a friendship treaty of cooperation with the Armenians. And this has led to a number of high-level exchanges. We have active trade and cultural cooperation. And in recent times, we have engaged with the Armenian leadership on a range of issues, particularly on regional and international importance. Armenia, as you know, has been a very strong supporter of our position on the fact that Kashmir has always been an inalienable part of India, which some of the other countries have contested. What we see with Azerbaijan is also a very strong relationship, which has also grown in intensity over time. There are certain differences on political issues, but on the economic front, India and Azerbaijan have actually collaborated fairly intensely, especially in the area of hydrocarbons. As regards the recent developments in the Nagorno-Karabakh region, as you know, this is a very difficult and complicated history for that enclave. It is actually a small pocket within Azerbaijan, which has a large community of ethnic Armenians. And there have been several wars dating back from the time of the Tsarist Russia to the USSR, and now in recent times. We saw in 2020 a particularly violent conflagration take place, which had led to the Azeris occupying large tracts of Nagorno-Karabakh. And a few days ago, last week, in fact, we saw another conflict. What started off was the link road between Armenia and the enclave was shut down, and then the Azeri forces came in and overran the Azeri the ethnic Armenian forces over there. The Russians have brokered a deal leading to a ceasefire, and they are assisting in the evacuation of the ethnic Armenians. India has always believed that all these issues should be resolved through negotiations and not the use of force. But India has never really recognized that particular enclave and its independence.
Ambassador Bhattacharya, at one event hosted by India in New York, the leaders of the Global South lauded India for sharing COVID-19 vaccines with them. The Global South leaders also said that India deserves a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. Prime Minister Modi, for one, has been pushing for what he calls reformed multilateralism. How is India's quest for, one, becoming the voice of the Global South, and two, a permanent UNSC member shaping up?
India has always been a voice for what we call the South, or, earlier it was the non-aligned bloc. But today, I think the Global South has acquired particular prominence, and India has a very, very dominant voice in this particular aspect, not only in collating the voice of the Global South. You recall the Voice of the Global South Summit, which we had hosted, and Prime Minister had spoken with 125 countries on that occasion. And we had presented these findings to the G20. So we have also promoted South-South cooperation very actively and worked with their priorities of those nations in the global South. So we have always been a very credible and reliable partner. And today, I think we are a much more active member in this particular South-South collaboration. The vaccine Maitri that you mentioned was one of those examples where we reached out to the global South. It is true that the multilateral system, particularly the United Nations, which has done admirable work over the last several decades, is today in a state of flux because it does not reflect the contemporary realities. And the basic contemporary reality that it has failed to champion is that of the cause of the global South.
Right.
And I think there is a growing voice that the developing countries in particular need to have a more presence, not only in the UN, but also in the UN Security Council. The case for India's candidature for a permanent seat in the UN Security Council is actually a given, although given the power dynamics of the way things happen in the United Nations, there has not been full progress in that matter. But India, South Africa, Brazil remain very, very strong contenders from the global South for this particular campaign. We are coming up to the 80th anniversary of the United Nations very soon, and we hope that there would be much further progress on the governmental negotiations that are currently being proposed.
Now, Minister Jaishankar says India's G20 presidency was quite challenging because it came amid a sharp east-west polarization and deep north-south divide as well. Now, my question to you is this: what will it take for India and Indian diplomacy to navigate this geopolitical minefield?
I think you already saw the pudding in the outcomes of the G20 summit, which was held so recently in New Delhi, with spectacular outcomes and a positive contribution towards the global community. I think we had moved into the presidency of the G20 at a time when there was a lack of hope and despair. We had the pandemic and the Ukraine crisis, and people were having declining growth rates across the world. But I think what we've been able to do through this very energetic effort led by the leadership of the Indian side and the Prime Minister in particular, was that we were able to energize the global community towards consensus in bringing hope for growth and development on the one hand, also looking for peace and stability, particularly in areas, and you saw that there was unanimous consensus on the joint statement. And finally, I think what we did see was that the voice of the global South had a very, very prominent role in the entire proceedings and the outcomes. And it is also very interesting to note that there will be two members of the global South who will follow India's presidency in the G20 in the years ahead.
And finally, Ambassador Bhattacharya, Minister Jaishankar also says the world has double standards. The countries that occupy positions of influence are resisting the pressure to change. Also, that the countries with historical influence have weaponized a lot of those capabilities. Who is he talking about and why?
Well, as you see, the multilateral system that we have today and the institutions were largely crafted at the end of the Second World War, and they, in a sense, reflected the winners and losers of that particular time. The world has moved a lot since then. We are no longer, a poor country. We are not only a developing country, we are the fifth largest. And you see this happen across the globe, with many emerging nations acquiring greater prominence. And therefore, it is imperative that the international structure and the global governance also reflects these changes that have happened in the world since. So we are now in the forefront of economic activity, technology developments, as well as in terms of determining global and regional affairs. So that is something that has to be reflected in the UN and the Security Council, the WTO and the WHO and so on. But there is resistance from the countries who are current in the seat of power. It is very difficult to give up power or to share it. And that is a reality that we are grappling with. But I think the reality that we have grown, that we have the capacity and the willingness to contribute to regional and global affairs is increasingly being recognized. And the global South, in a sense, will be a way forward. And again, I say if the UN and the other multilateral systems and the people who currently hold the power over there do not change the system, they will make themselves irrelevant, because the relevance of the Global South will continue to grow.
Ambassador Bhattacharya, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.